Imagine, dear listeners, it is January 15th, 2026, exactly at 5:19 local time, a time when the world's oceans should still be lying in peaceful silence. But suddenly this idyll is shattered. The sea is smooth as a mirror. The wind breathes at barely 5 knots and visibility extends endlessly into the distance. On the bridge of the USS George Washington, this gigantic colossus of the American Navy, a breathless silence reigns. Not a word is exchanged, but then a sharp, eerie signal on the radar. No alarm tone, not yet, but a piercing alien spike on the surface picture. New contacts bearing from 211 to 260 degrees appear like ghosts out of nowhere. The Combat Information Center. The CIC does not even repeat the call, they already see it, and their pulse is racing. 5 echoes materialize, almost simultaneously spread wide apart faster than any normal shipping traffic should be. No AIS signal, no commercial characteristic, just clean hull outlines that scream military. Speed, 23 knots, then it climbs to 25. At exactly this moment, the entire crew of the carrier feels a deep vibration through the deck plates. Internal systems switch into an intermediate mode, not combat, not routine, but something more threatening in between. On the bridge, the captain remains calm, his voice like a rock in the surf. Log the contacts, maintain course. The officer of the deck confirms, course stable, speed unchanged. Below deck, sailors freeze in mid-step. A tractor stops at the edge of the hangar bay. Yellow shirts pause, hands still on the tie-downs. No one looks around. They know this tone, this breath of danger that falls over them like a shadow. It is not often, but often enough to make the blood freeze in one's veins. Dear listeners, this is the prelude to a dramatic duel on the high seas that could keep the world in suspense. 5 surface contacts confirmed by the CIC. Multiple bearings, coordinated maneuver, unidentified, a word that sounds like a threat at this distance. Unidentified does not mean unknown. It means unspoken, a code for the Russian shadows that are approaching. Electro-optical cameras swing out one after the other, fixing on the contacts as soon as they break through the horizon haze. Long gray hulls, sharp bow tips, military silhouettes. No flags visible yet, but the bridge hails them anyway. First in standard professional English, then in Russian. No answer. The distance melts away 20 nautical miles, 1816. The closest point of approach is automatically recalculated and the number drops lower and lower. Someone in the CIC whispers it quietly. They are fanning out. They are fanning. Exactly so, dear listeners. The 5 contacts are no longer holding parallel courses. They are spreading out, adjusting angles, forming a flat arc across the carrier's projected path. Not an encirclement, not a pursuit, but a block. A bold attempt to stop the USS George Washington, this symbol of American power with over 100,000 tons of displacement and a crew of thousands. On the bridge, the captain steps closer to the chart table, not even touching it. Any emissions? He asks. Minimal, answers the CIC. Only surface search, no fire control system. This is intentional, a calculated game with fire. The carrier's sensors are now wide open. Radar, infrared, electronic support measures. Everything is recording every bearing change, every throttle adjustment, every second. At 14 miles, visual confirmation sharpens. No merchant wakes, no fishing gear, no more doubts. 5 Russian warships. The name is not spoken aloud on the bridge, yet everyone knows it. The hull forms are unmistakable, gray steel low profiles, purposeful lines. They hold formation as if they had practiced this geometry 100 times, a maneuver that reeks of aggression. And do you know what makes the whole thing even more explosive? Just days earlier, on January 10th, 2026, the U.S. Coast Guard had boarded a Russian-marked ship in Atlantic waters, a tanker linked to Venezuela and escorted by Russian naval units. The Russians had condemned this as a new low point in relations, warned of escalation, and threatened harsh consequences. Now here on the open sea, this threat seems to be taking shape, an act of revenge, a test of nerves. Tensions are boiling over and the world watches breathlessly. The carrier does not turn to. At this displacement, turning would be a declaration, so she does not turn, a demonstration of strength that roars louder than any cannon. On the flight deck, the island towers over rows of parked aircraft, their canopies gleaming in the sun, motionless. Elevators remain locked. Nothing launches. Nothing needs to launch. The message lies in the restraint and the cool composure. The closest point of approach drops below 6 miles, close enough to turn any miscalculation into an international scandal. One of the Russian ships pushes ahead of the others, its wake thickening, speed increasing slightly. Not enough to cross the carrier's bow, but enough to test, to provoke. The bridge camera zooms in, crew visible on deck, helmets on, no one running, no visible weapons crews. Controlled, calm, professional, yet behind it lurks the hostility, the old rivalry that has smoldered since the Cold War and now in January 2026 flares up again. The carrier answers in the same language. "Maintain course," repeats the captain. The helmsman does not blink. 6 miles become 5. Deep inside the ship, a status light flips from green to yellow. No announcement, no siren, just a silent acknowledgement that the margin for error has vanished. The ocean between them shrinks to a narrow strip, 5 warships in tight formation, deliberate angles. This is no coincidence. This is a calculated attack on the freedom of the seas. At 5:24 local time, the geometry on the surface picture changes dramatically. The 5 contacts cease acting as independent ships and become parts of a single threatening mechanism. Their spacing narrows, bearings shift by degrees, not miles, small surgical changes. Contacts adjusting course, reports the CIC. Speed constant, coordinated. The word echoes like a curse. The leading Russian ship turns 10 degrees to port, another falls back half a mile, widening the arc. 2 others hold the flank steady. From above, it would look less like a line, more like a gate, slowly closing, not hunting, not surrounding, but a barrier. The closest point of approach is recalculated. The numbers flicker, then settle at 4.3 nautical miles. The carrier's projected track now cuts directly through the center of the arc. If she holds course, she breaks through the space the Russians are forming around her. If she turns even slightly, the geometry collapses to their advantage, a perfidious game of chess on the sea. On the bridge, no one mentions it. The officer of the deck watches the digital chart in real time. Every vector is automatically logged, every bearing change stamped with second precision. The captain studies the surface picture expressionlessly. "Any answers to hails?" he asks. "Negative," answers the CIC. Radio silence persisting. Silence at this distance is not ambiguity, it is intent, pure provocation. The electro-optical feeds sharpen, hull numbers become clearer, superstructures resolve into clean lines. These are not patrol ships drifting by chance. These are warships that are exactly where they want to be, driven by Moscow's aggressive politics. On the flight deck, the wind ripples over the tie-down chains. Sailors resume movements, but slower, more deliberate. No one runs. No one needs to. The carrier does not accelerate, does not brake. Speed is authority on the sea, but predictability is power. The CIC reports Russian ships holding blockade position. The words are chosen carefully. They are not crossing the bow, they are narrowing the corridor. This distinction is crucial. Crossing the bow would force a reaction. Narrowing the corridor invites one a bait for pride. At 3.8 miles, one of the Russian ships pushes closer than the others, its wake densifies. Speed increases by 2 knots. The movement is subtle, yet the sensors capture it immediately. "Contact 3 increasing speed," calls the CIC. "Now 27 knots. The carrier's answer? Silence. No alarms, no maneuver orders, just the steady rhythm of the turbines driving thousands of tons of steel forward on the same heading as before. In the CIC, analysts watch the electronic environment. The Russians are emitting just enough for navigation and coordination. No fire control radar, no target illumination. They stay under the threshold in the gray zone where diplomacy and war blur. At 4 miles, it becomes 3.5. A Russian ship on the starboard side turns its bow slightly inward enough to be noticed, not enough to violate collision regulations, but enough to make a point, another needle prick provocation. The bridge crew sees it, does not comment on it. Closest point of approach stable but decreasing, says the CIC. On the map, the carrier's projected path traverses the narrowed gap. There is room tight, but room enough. The Russian formation narrows again, then stabilizes. They have set their line. Now they wait, and waiting is the most dangerous phase where nerves lie bare and a spark could ignite everything. No engines flare, no weapons are unveiled from the outside, nothing looks dramatic. But inside the ship, every sensor is awake, every camera rolling, every decision is written into a logbook that forgets nothing. The captain finally speaks. Hold steady. Record everything. It is not a challenge, not defiance, it is procedure, but one that radiates strength. 3 nautical miles. At this distance, one can see crew movements with the naked eye, hear the deep hum of engines through the water, feel how little space separates professionalism from miscalculation. 5 Russian warships hold the line, an American carrier approaches unstoppably. No one has fired yet, the pressure is real palpable, a psychological war that makes hearts race. And now, dear listeners, I ask you, what would you do if you stood on the bridge? Would you hold course and challenge the Russians or yield to avoid escalation? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let us ignite this debate and see how the world really ticks. At 5:29 local time, the distance stops shrinking, not because the Russian ships give way, but because the carrier's steady advance forces the geometry to resolve. The arc they built must now decide, close up or open just enough to avoid contact. In the CIC, no one celebrates the pause. Pauses at sea are fragile as glass. Closest point of approach stable at 3.1 nautical miles, reports the watch officer. Relative movement stable. Stable is good, predictable is better. The Russian ships hold formation, but the precision crumbles at the edges. One ship lags seconds behind another, overcorrects a course change, then compensates. Tiny imperfections invisible to the naked eye, but obvious to systems that notice everything. On the bridge, the captain watches the surface picture without blinking. Changes in emissions, he asks. Minimal, answers the CIC. Same profiles. No fire control, no lock. They are still playing the margins, a risky game in times when only days before, on January 8th, 2026, Russia had condemned the U.S. seizure of a tanker as an act of piracy and threatened with naval presence. Below deck, the carrier hums in its usual rhythm, thousands of systems running exactly as planned. This ship does not tense up, it does not flinch, it absorbs pressure through design. On the flight deck, aircraft remain parked. No catapults cycle, no deck crews hasten. From above, the carrier looks almost indifferent. This is intentional. A sudden launch would change the tone. Silence keeps it neutral. At 2.9 miles, a helicopter lifts off the deck, not aggressive, not fast. It rises, as always, stabilizes in a hover before gliding forward. Its presence is precise. No threat, no coincidence. An observer. The helicopter maintains altitude well outside Russian airspace, sensors pointed outward. Cameras roll, infrared paints, the wakes, the exhaust gases, the heat signatures of engines pushing steel through water. Everything is recorded, an invisible net of surveillance. One of the Russian ships adjusts again, its bow swings, a few degrees outward, subtle, but it widens the gap. Another follows moments later, the line loosens. In the CIC, the watch team marks the change. Time bearing speed. The data path becomes longer, more complete. This is the counter. No warnings, no threats, no escalation, only documentation and refusal to yield. At this distance, professionalism is the weapon a sword made of discipline. The Russian ships continue to shadow, but the blockade position softens. Their arc becomes a curve, the curve a loose screen. They are close enough to be clearly seen, but no longer positioned to force a turn. The carrier traverses the space they tried to deny slowly, deliberately. At 2.5 miles, the wake patterns shift again. A Russian ship reduces speed by 1 knot, another holds but widens the distance. The formation exhales no dramatic break but a gradual easing. No one announces it, but everyone sees it. Pressure works in both directions. On the bridge, the captain speaks again. Maintain course. The helmsman's hands remain steady. The helicopter completes a wide orbit, never crossing lines, never posturing. Its sensors gather what the eye cannot. Engine vibrations, crew movement, subtle throttle changes that will tell a story later. Far from this water, the Russian ships do not challenge the aircraft, do not illuminate it, they let it exist. This choice counts a silent concession. At 2 miles, the collision risk drops sharply. The most dangerous moment passes, not because anyone yielded loudly, but because no one pushed too far. The carrier continues on her track, massive and unhurried. Behind her, the Russian ships remain present, watching close, yet no longer dictating the geometry. Inside the ship, the atmosphere never changes. No cheers, no relaxation, just a quiet understanding that restraint won. This was no firefight, no dominance game with weapons. It was about control, and control remained on the bridge this time. At 5:36 local time, this is where mistakes usually happen. Not at first contact, not during the approach, but in the quiet seconds after peak pressure when crews think the worst is over and discipline crumbles. In the CIC, the watch team remains focused, eyes wandering from radar to optics to electronic displays in a practiced loop. No one relaxes. Not yet. Closest point of approach increasing, reports the officer. Now 2.2 nautical miles. The number should bring relief, it does not. On the surface picture, the Russian formation is no longer symmetrical. One ship drifts slightly ahead, its wake overlapping the turbulence of a nearby hull. Another holds position too long before correcting. The spacing is professional, but the perfection is gone. Exactly then it happens. A Russian ship to port makes a sharper adjustment than before, not aggressive, not reckless, but sudden enough to register. Contact 2 changing course. Calls the CIC. Port 5 degrees, speed unchanged. 5 degrees is little, yet at this distance a decision. On the bridge, the captain watches the maneuver on the repeater display. He does not speak, immediately waits until the movement is complete, until the system confirms whether it is a probe or a correction. The ship stabilizes again, no collision risk, no bow crossing, just a brief moment where steel and intent moved closer than planned. The carrier does not respond, that more than anything else shifts the balance. The Russian ship holds the new heading for seconds, then glides back. Its wake thins out, speed drops minimally. The formation behind adjusts more slowly, less tightly linked. The blockade position is ended. It does not end dramatically, it dissolves. At one point, 9 miles, the Russian ships begin to open their distance. The arc disintegrates into segments, segments become individual tracks. Formation loosening. Reports the CIC. Shadow position only. Shadow is observation, blockade is influence, the difference is everything. Overhead, the helicopter remains stable, sensors continuing to collect orbit wide and unprovocative. Its consistency sends its own silent message. We are still here, we are still watching. On the flight deck, crews move more freely, but the pace remains controlled. No one celebrates, no one accepts the end of the encounter. The carrier travels on upon the same heading as before the appearance of the Russian ships. This continuity matters. At 1.5 miles, the next Russian ship glides astern, its bow no longer aligned with the carrier's path. Another mirrors the movement on the opposite side. The corridor widens without anyone admitting it aloud. On the bridge, the captain finally speaks. Log the maneuver changes, no comment, no interpretation, only facts. In the CIC, the log fills with timestamps and bearings a complete protocol of how pressure was exerted and how it failed to force a turn. The Russian ships remain near, but the energy has changed. Their wakes no longer cut the path. Their movements are reactive, not directive. The moment is over. At 1 nautical mile, the escalation risk drops sharply. Tension remains, but residual, not active, the kind that echoes after victorious restraint. The carrier drives forward, massive and unchanged. Behind her, the 5 Russian warships fall into a loose pursuit pattern, maintaining presence without control. They have made their point, so has the carrier. No one fired, no one shouted, no one blinked on the bridge. Yet the result is clear. The blockade attempt failed. What remains is observation, documentation, and growing distance between hulls that were never meant to touch. This is how pressure breaks at sea, not with noise, with refusal. At 5:44 local time, the surface picture calms. 5 Russian warships remain on radar, yet their vectors no longer intersect the carrier's track. They trail in the distance, drawn further apart, holding parallel courses that signal presence without interference, shadows, not blockade. In the CIC, the watch team confirms what the displays show. Contacts stable, closest point of approach, rising, no further maneuvers. The words are neutral, professional, final. On the bridge of the USS George Washington, the posture does not visibly change. The captain does not address the crew, he does not need to. The ship travels exactly as before the encounter. The same course, the same speed, the same silent authority. This continuity is the conclusion. Below deck systems gradually switch back, status lights from yellow to green, not announced, just acknowledged. The inner rhythm of the carrier never broke, it only tensed up, then released. On the flight deck, the helicopter completes its final orbit and turns back to the ship. It lands smoothly, rotors spinning down without ceremony. Its mission is complete, not because something happened, but because nothing escalated. The sensors only stop recording when the distance is safe. Every bearing change, every throttle adjustment, every second of silence, all logged. The Russian ships hold parallel tracks for minutes longer, then they widen the distance further. One peels slightly away, another reduces speed. The formation dissolves into individual movements, no longer acting as a shape. The moment is over. No broadcast message, no signal flags, no victory proclaimed at sea. Outcomes are rarely announced. They are derived. The carrier did not turn, did not accelerate, did not fire, and yet the blockade attempt failed. From the outside, it may seem uneventful. 5 ships approached 5, fell back. Steel passed steel without contact. But in the logs and the recordings, the history is complete. This was no weapons test. It was a test of will. In naval operations, restraint is not passivity. It is discipline, practiced through repetition, drilled into crews who know the most dangerous moments are those where nothing happens, because that is where judgment decides everything. The USS George Washington continues her transit, the ocean ahead open and unchanged. Behind her, the Russian warships remain visible for a time, then they fade into the horizon haze one after the other. Presence acknowledged, pressure absorbed, course held. By the time the final contact sinks below the radar threshold, the carrier has already moved on. There will be no headlines on board, no medals, no speeches, just a closed log entry and another memory carved into remembrance. At sea, power is not measured by how loudly one acts, but whether one moves at all. And today, only one ship decided the direction. Dear listeners, what did you think of this epic duel on the high seas? Was this a victory of American discipline over Russian aggression, or just the prelude to greater conflict? Share your opinions in the comments. Every thought counts to drag the truth into the light. Stay tuned, stay vigilant, and let us watch the waves of history together.